You know, I feel like we've been doing really well lately, starting much closer to 10 o'clock on the nose. Today, probably a step in the wrong direction. But nonetheless, we're glad you're with us. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We're going to get rolling here in just a couple of seconds. Chip Towers on hand. A lot to talk about with him. Recap of a busy UGA recruiting weekend. I may have been running a little late today, but nonetheless, the action, the intensity of the show is going to be everything that you've come to expect. We've got a fun summer Q&A. Going to make today's program even more interactive with many of you, for many of you. So I look forward to doing all of that. Hope you had a great weekend. Hope your summer is kind of getting rolling on here. For those of you who are teachers, maybe you're sneaking a little peek at the program. You got a couple days left. For those of you who are students, you've got a couple of days left. No matter what your story is, we're glad you've chosen to be with us as DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, begins right now.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
You ever come back to work on a Monday morning and you're more tired than you were on Friday afternoon when you left? That's kind of my story today. Daughter's 4th birthday party on Saturday. Son's final baseball game on Sunday. It has been a little bit of a grind the last couple of days. All great stuff and all fun, but it's one of those things where I'm sort of glad to be back in the friendly confines of our DawgNation World Headquarters studios so I can catch my breath and kind of relax a little bit. I know many of you, your summer weekends, late spring weekends, very much the same kind of way. It's one of the reasons why we're doing DawgNation Days of Summer on this program all summer long, and the big events that I'll tell you more about later on as well, because listen, we just feel like the summer's got its own pace, right? There's a lot of activities going on for families and for young folks, and around here, we're going to relax and have some fun, get ready to look towards the upcoming season. And obviously, we got great events that are going to be a big part of that as well. But around here, we celebrate the summer, and DawgNation Days of Summer, of course, is our way of kind of doing that. But it's not all just look ahead to the upcoming season. It's also not a sleepy, lazy, relaxed time necessarily for Georgia on the recruiting trail, because May and June, we've been pointing to this for a while, as a time in which the recruiting stuff was going to be very heated up and very accelerated, and a lot of big news would happen. Not always necessarily commitments, although there have been plenty of those recently, but in some respects, laying the foundation for what could be future commitments. And no doubt this weekend, at least based on the publicly available social media type stuff, this was clearly a pretty strong weekend for Georgia, where it would seem that some bricks and mortar stuff got done, some foundation got laid, and some big names that we kind of talk about a lot. It seems like some of those guys we may be talking about a lot more, and doing so in kind of a positive fashion. Let me start with this. Kinley Ringo was probably the biggest name on hand, maybe the headliner, with no disrespect to anybody else who might have been there for Georgia, but I think we addressed Ringo on Friday. There was a lot of noise and buzz about him coming from Arizona over here, and that's probably part of the issue. Ringo had the farthest to travel to get here. It's not just the fact that he's a 5-star, recruit, but he had the farthest to travel to get here. So his visit was going to get a lot of attention, and as luck would have it, he was also among the most active, he and his mom both, among the most active on social media this weekend, highlighting their time there. It was the scavenger hunt, and Jeff Sintel, when he's been with us on DawgNation Daily, has done a good job of explaining what this thing is for us in the past. This was a big hit last year with a lot of major recruits who came in, and instead of just taking a tour of the campus, it was turned into a game. It was to find Coach Smart and all the things on campus they were supposed to find, and by making it into a game and obviously kind of rolling out the red carpet around that, it ended up being one of the biggest hits with the 2019 class, and the early returns are seemingly much the same for the 2020 class as well. Let me show you a quick picture here for those of you watching on video. If you're not, I'll try to describe it. You see Ringo and his family standing there with Coach Dan Lanning and having a good time there. There were a lot of those kinds of pics that show up on social media, and we talk about the kind of the relaxed vibe of the summer. In pictures like this, you see, even though the recruiting work that Georgia's trying to do is obviously pretty intense, they're obviously trying to create that kind of relaxed, campus is out, people are kind of in summer mode around the city of Athens. They're trying to create that and conjure up that vibe when it comes to the visit stuff, and a lot of the social media stuff very much reflected that as well. There was one other picture from Kinley Ringo's Twitter that I wanted to show you here too, and this one, I'm not going to lie to you, I have a weird thing when it comes to snakes, and I guess this snake was also a part of the social media, I should say, the scavenger hunt thing from last year as well. But Keely Ringo's mom, Ringo the 5-star cornerback, his mom all smiles in every picture of her I saw all weekend long. But in this particular picture, she is wrapped by some gigantic, is this a boa constrictor, a python? The truth is, I don't know a ton about this kind of stuff other than I don't want any part of this snake whatsoever. She seems right at home. I mean, this thing's wrapping its way around her neck and like doubling back across. There's no telling what that must have felt like. Ringo's caption is, my mom is crazy. I could never. And listen, I'm right there with Keely Ringo on that. For those of you watching on video, you see this. If you're not, if you're radio or podcast, you can check this out on Ringo's Twitter feed. This gigantic snake. There is not a chance in the world I would be in the same room with that sans glace, and yet she's got it wrapped around her neck, and it's wrapping its way around her body. That is a crazy sight to see, but she's obviously a braver gal than I am, and it's cool to see the Ringo clan having such a good time on their visit there. Someone else who apparently had some fun was the offensive lineman, I guess you'll now have to say / defensive lineman, Justin Rogers. Now, Rogers is about to announce his commitment today. That news is going to come out, but he was at Georgia for his official visit over this weekend. He shared his message about basically saying, I had a good time down in Georgia. Now, I don't know if that means there's any chance that Georgia's kind of gotten back in on this, and as we've said before, it's sort of the complicated deal of my presumption. I told this to Jeff Santel on Friday. My presumption on all of this is that Georgia still likes Rogers as an interior offensive lineman, like a guard. And it sounds like Rogers wants to do something else beyond that he might want to play defensive line in college. And that's one of the reasons why when Rogers makes his announcement today, I'm going to presume it's going to be a school other than Georgia, but Georgia had a chance to entertain him, and Rogers seemed to have a good time with that. Now, speaking of Jeff Santel, who I mentioned a moment ago, I want to go back to Friday's edition of DawgNation Daily briefly for a moment because Jeff also gave us a recap then of something that I want to make sure you caught about one of the other guys who was there. And with all due respect, I mentioned before that Keely Ringo may have been the highlight visitor for this particular weekend when it comes to scavenger hunt, just because he had the farthest to travel to get there. But maybe some of the biggest rumblings may involve a different 5-star, the 5-star defensive lineman Jordan Burch out of Columbia, South Carolina. Quick reminder of what Jeff said about this on Friday, because Jeff certainly seems to think that the relationship between the 5-star defensive lineman from out of state, enemy territory, if you will, in Columbia, South Carolina, and Georgia, the scavenger hunt may be another example of how this is blossoming, and this could be real right now. Here's Jeff Santel.
I think it is very real here right now with Georgia and Jordan Burch. I think he enjoyed himself a great deal at G-Day, and I do feel that there is a strong chance, a very, very strong chance that he shows up for the scavenger hunt as well. And if that's the case, that will mean that Jordan Burch has chosen to come to Georgia over South Carolina. Of course, he lives in Columbia. And that also means he's not at Clemson whatsoever as well.
One more quick one from Jeff Santel on the subject of Jordan Burch. If Georgia could get involved here, when you also think about a guy like Keely Ringo, all of a sudden, the way we've been counting these 5-stars, going back for the classes of 2018 and 2019, the huge collection of 5-stars that have been brought in, some people maybe at one point in time had a lesser expectation for the class of 2020, that the Dogs might not be moving at quite the same pace when it comes to that huge collection of elite recruits. But all of a sudden now, when you start counting up the possibilities, listen, there are a lot of big-time 5-star names that Georgia's seemingly in the mix with. Here's a reminder of that once again from Jeff Santel.
And I think that's another 5-star right there that everybody wants to think about. How many potential 5-stars Georgia could add in this class? Jordan Burch and Georgia came together really fast over the last 2 to 3 weeks, especially right before G-Day. And all of a sudden, that number, when you start thinking about Keely Ringos of the world, and you start thinking about guys like Broderick Jones that's already in the fold, Mikhail Sherman that's already in the fold, and what about Marshawn Lloyd? What about Kendall Milton? All of a sudden, the stars start stacking up where I think 6 or 7 still seems very possible for Georgia in the 2020 class.
Yeah, listen, 6 or 7 sounds about right, and Georgia fans would certainly take that. Before I wrap up on the recruiting topic here, let me mention a couple things here as well. Speaking of Jeff Santel, I'll invite you to go to DawgNation.com. We're going to talk more about this on our show tomorrow. Jacoby Cowan, Jeff's preview of his trip to Georgia over the weekend included a couple of very interesting nuggets, and I'm not just saying that because my name got mentioned in the piece at DawgNation.com. You need to read this from Jacoby Cowan. This was really good with Jeff Santel. Also, another defensive lineman, Jalen Carter, has put out his top 3. And I think it's kind of funny that his top 3 is essentially the top 3. I'll show this to you in video. He's got Clemson, Alabama, and Georgia. That's the top 3 in everybody's book right now. And Georgia's obviously looking to overtake not just the Tigers and the Tide on the field, but also overtake that group when it comes to Jalen Carter's recruitment there as well. So Carter gives Georgia a top 3 nod here, along with some big programs. And then one final note, and I did think it was interesting. I know, I guess 24/7 Sports had reported this, that Richt Gilbert, the 5-star tight end, who's I think as important as there can be for Georgia in this class of 2020, did visit Knoxville on Saturday. A little bit of an eye-opener about the fact that he was not at the scavenger hunt, at least for me. I actually reached out to Jeff before the show today and said, what's going on with Gilbert not being in Athens for the scavenger hunt? And Jeff was like, no, come on, BA. Gilbert was there a year ago. He's done the scavenger hunt thing before, and so not necessarily that big of a deal when it comes to Gilbert being in Knoxville. And I think even the folks in Knoxville are kind of saying this as well. So it is worth pointing out. If it was the shoe on the other foot, you better believe I'd be saying it. So it's only fair to mention that Richt Gilbert did take a Tennessee visit over the weekend that I believe got initially reported by 24/7 Sports, but it doesn't sound like, based on some of the rumblings that I've heard, mostly from talking to Jeff Sintel, that there's necessarily anything to have too many heart palpitations about when it comes to that. It's still going to be a recruiting battle for Gilbert, but it's certainly not a Deontay Wilder style blow to have Gilbert in Knoxville, given the fact that he did do the scavenger hunt thing a year ago. But the bottom line is, it is certainly getting hotter outside. The recruiting stuff is getting hot as well, and the big 5-star names, as Jeff Sintel said on our program on Friday, and we get a reminder of today, Georgia is in the mix with a lot of those right now. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Hello to you. Thanks for being with us live on video today, 10 a.m. DawgNation. Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, radio at noon as well, and Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and as a podcast wherever you find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. We are just really glad that you have chosen to be with us here today, and as I said before, really getting excited about our DawgNation Days of Summer. Now, we're kind of celebrating our days of summer throughout the summer here each day on DawgNation Daily. But in addition to that, we've got 2 huge events coming up, starting on Thursday, June 13th at Callaway Resort and Gardens. Now, here's one thing I got to have you know. This is very important. The registration for your chance to win a VIP stay at Callaway Resort and Gardens with us on Thursday, June 13th, that expires on Wednesday. So you've only got the couple days here this week. The deadline to enter is on Wednesday. Now, the good news is it cannot be easier to find this. If you simply go to DawgNation.com, there's a tab right there for that. Go there. Make sure you've gotten registered to win your VIP stay. Now, the great news is, there are some rooms blocked off and saved for DawgNation folks. So if you don't win, we got plenty of room for you there. We can get you involved in what we're going to do there at Callaway Resort and Gardens. But we want you to have at least a chance to win. Someone will be a lucky winner. We want you to have a chance at that. So please go to DawgNation.com. Find the tab for that. It'll be easy right there at the top, and you can get involved in that. And we cannot wait to have you as a part of DawgNation Days of Summer, starting June 13th with us at Callaway Resort and Gardens. Register for your chance to win right now while there is still time to do so. That expires on Wednesday. Now, one of the things we've also been doing on the show the last few days, and I wanted to start this a little earlier today so I can take more comments during the regular broadcast portion, is our summer Q&A. That's just something that we do to kind of loosen the vibe around here, give you a chance to interact with us on that. So let me give you a preview now of what our questions are. That way, when we have some space later on the program, I can kind of get you involved on that and get you talking about that. So here are today's DawgNation Days of Summer Q&A questions. And please, if you're listening to the show, radio, podcast, hit me up on Twitter at DawgNation Daily. But if you're watching on video, go ahead and drop these in YouTube, Facebook, and later on we'll take a lot more of these comments. Here's our first one. This is more of a serious deal. What is the number one recruiting storyline to watch right now? You may say it's the pursuit of multiple 5-star running backs. It's making sure a guy like a Richt Gilbert stays at home after some in-state guys have kind of gotten out of the state here as of late. Defensive line, you may view that as the number one recruiting priority. I'm going to give you, GA fans, to go on the record about that today. Question number 2, are you excited about the Diamond Dogs in the postseason? They're not the only spring sport team involved right now, but based on the way they close out the regular season, this is a program that has a very good chance of winning a national championship, I believe, and it starts in the SEC tournament this week. Love to hear your thoughts on the Diamond Dogs. And then finally, are you afraid of snakes? Because I am, and seeing Ringo's mom with that gigantic snake wrapped around her neck as a part of the scavenger hunt this weekend was kind of a freaky thing for me to see. So I'll give you a chance to weigh in on all of that as a part of our DawgNation Days of Summer Q&A today here on DawgNation Daily. Now, before I bring in Chip Towers, let me also tell you, as I said before, kind of a busy weekend for UJ Spring Sports. You had the softball team that had weather issues in Minneapolis yesterday. They're going to play today. I think it's 11 a.m. They return to playing today. Baseball team doesn't get going until Wednesday. They'll play the winner of either the Florida or I believe it's the Texas A&M game. That'll be their first game on Wednesday. Tennis team had a great run Friday night, beating Vanderbilt. Saturday beat Duke in the semifinals. Did have their season come to an end at the hands of Stanford in the national championship match as of yesterday. But great job by women's tennis. You've got men's golf still active. The NCAA regional starts, or I should say the NCAA finals in Fayetteville, Arkansas starts in a few days. Track still rocking and rolling and going here. So you got kind of a busy run right now for spring sports. DawgNation.com been doing a great job covering that, so make sure you check out the world-famous DawgNation.com for more of that every single day, including its SEC baseball tournament starts on Wednesday. Let me also tell you this. A lot of you getting ready for graduation parties. Kroger, a great place to go for that. If you're hosting a kindergarten graduation, a fifth grade graduation, a middle school graduation, high school, college, whatever, how about this great deal for Kroger? You can get a sandwich catering bundle, which includes assorted sandwiches, a fresh fruit party platter tray, your choice of cake or cupcakes, and it's just $80. You can either go to Kroger.com or speak to one of the deli associates at the Kroger near you, and you can get one ordered. It feeds like 20 to 24 people. So if you got a big party coming up, or if you just want to do this for Memorial Day, a great way to save right there at Kroger on a terrific sandwich party platter tray. Get that at your local Kroger. All right, we'll have more of your summer Q&A responses later on. And I have a bonus question, too, for you coming up a little bit later on. But for now, though, here on DawgNation Daily, let's get ready to talk to Chip Towers.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Let's talk to Chip Towers here on DawgNation Daily. Always great to have him with us on the program. And Chip, hope you're doing well. Hope you had a nice weekend. We appreciate you being back with us.
Yeah, it was wonderful. Yeah, I got to cap it off in the middle of the weekend watching Emerson Hancock absolutely dealing against Alabama for Georgia to complete a sweep of their final regular season series and go into the postseason just about as hot as any team possibly can. So that was very impressive and great weather, and it was a great weekend. Thank you, bud.
I want to talk to you more about the baseball stuff in a minute because I do think this team is really fun to watch right now, and Hancock seemingly healthy, I think gives Georgia a real shot to make a run in the postseason. So we'll do that coming up in just a moment. Let me begin with this. Kirby Smart was in Bainbridge, Georgia last week. Kind of a cool trip back to his hometown, and I guess making good on a promise to go speak to that football team after they'd won the state championship. But one of the subjects that came up there was his love for Georgia and why he's got no reason to go anywhere because of that. And, Chip, I actually talked about this a little bit last week in the program in relationship to something that our colleague Mark Bradley had written for the AJC about the possibility that Kirby Smart might be coach for life. And let me quickly set my opinion up on this, and I want to give you a chance to respond to it. Obviously, Chip, betting against a coach staying anywhere forever is always the safer bet because when you look around the SEC, you see short-tenured coaches all across the board, and that's pretty representative of what the major level of college football looks like. These jobs just don't last forever. And yet, when you look at Kirby's penchant for winning early in his career, the recruiting success that he's had, the fact that he's, truly at his alma mater, and it's, place where he met his wife and kind of everything else, that Kirby might not fall within the parameters of the typical coach in this regard. And Kirby staying at Georgia, this being the only head coaching job he ever has, that might be a little safer bet with him than it might be for some other coaches. Where do you kind of come down on that? What's your response to that?
Well, here's where I land on it, and I firmly believe this. And some people out there might say that I'm prejudiced because I've been around Georgia so long, and I have the good fortune of living in this area of our state and really this area of our country. If you can look at survey after survey after survey about great places to live in the United States of America, great places to retire in the United States of America, and the city of Athens, Georgia, ranks in the top 5 of all those. And there's there's good reason for it. So I say that to say this. I'm not surprised to hear Kirby say that. I really don't even think in a lot of ways that it needs to be verbalized because, Georgia is a destination job. In college football, period, Georgia is a destination job, and there are probably 10 or 20 of those in the country that you just don't leave of your own volition. Now, sometimes some people have left to go to the NFL, but I don't see that for Kirby Smart, whether he was an alumnus or not. And I go back to Mark Richt. That Mark Richt before him, he said, "I'll stay at Georgia as long as they'll have me." And quite frankly, I think that's the way it is here. I think that's the way it is at Alabama. I think it's probably the way it is at Tennessee and Florida and some other programs like that, LSU. But here's the trick: you got to be there, and you got to do well enough to be allowed to stay there. And Kirby has done a great job in his first 3 years, and based on recruiting and everything, I don't see any let off anytime soon. But to sustain that, into perpetuity is a really, really difficult thing. The more years you're around, the harder it gets, and the older you get, and the more the game changes. So but I mean, I'm not surprised at all that Kirby would say that. Now, Kirby's going to have opportunities, whether it be at the NFL, other places. He's that pedigree of a coach. Everybody's going to want a piece. They're going to be swinging by regularly with offers and enticements. But I would be surprised. I wouldn't expect him to take any of those based on what he's going on here. And heck, he's getting everything he asked for as well from an administrative standpoint. So if I were he, I'd want to stay as long as I could as well.
So you mentioned Mark Richt, and I think it's interesting because some of the pushback that we got on the show the other day when we talked about this was the idea of, and Bradley even wrote about this at AJC.com, which is, hey, a lot of people after a few years of the Mark Richt era would have thought he would have been coach at Georgia for life, and after 15 years, a lot of Georgia fans had kind of soured on him and were ready for a change. Here is something, Chip, that I think needs to be said in response to that, and this has been kind of a hot-button issue for me all offseason because we've seen a lot of comparisons between the early stages of Richt and the early stages of Smart. From a record standpoint, they look very, very, very similar. And yet I think below that, I do think that there are a lot of differences in Smart's first 3 years than Richt's first two. Yes, they both were, back-to-back division winners in year 2 and year 3, and yet I think Kirby's team last year was truly among the national elite, even though that it didn't make the college football playoff. Georgia, for instance, would have been a point spread favorite over every team in the country last year, with the exception of Alabama and Clemson. As you very well remember, in 2003, that would not have been the case for that Georgia team. They would not have been a point spread favorite over every team in the country but two. The back-to-back major bowl appearances is something that Mark Richt was not able to do over the course of his Georgia run. The recruiting success, it's easier to measure now than it probably was in the early 2000s, and yet I can feel pretty confident saying that Kirby's a better recruiter than Richt was. So this whole notion of that the Kirby era has started similarly to the Richt era, below the surface, I'm not quite so sure how true that really is.
Well, that's one of those. It's definitely going to be in the eye of the beholder. Here's another aspect of the Mark Richt era that people really don't talk about as much. That I think Georgia missed an opportunity when Mark Richt came in there and was really hot 2002, 2003, 2004, 2005. He was asking for a lot of the things that Kirby Smart is getting and has gotten now.
Yeah.
I mean, that's when the conversations first came up for indoor practice facilities. Mark Richt long ago had the idea of building a new locker room down at Stanford Stadium. There was discussions of it being in the West End or redoing the one they had in the East End. Of a football building. They ended up doing the compromise version down there on the end of Butts Mayer building. He wanted a free and clear indoor practice facility in the whole 9 yards. So two things make that different. One, the administration Mark Richt was working under at the time wasn't as, what would you say, gracious or ambitious as this one. And then secondly, you didn't have the SEC network and just just a giant fire hose of income that is flying in to all of these athletic departments about right now in the SEC. They look at South Carolina just opened a $50 million football facility. Well, that is the grease on the rails for Georgia to get theirs done. They're not going to sit there and watch while everybody else is building new facilities. That wasn't really the case in the early to mid 2000s when Mark Richt was asking for all that stuff, and Georgia had an opportunity to get ahead of the curve back at that time. And then, of course, the last thing is Florida and Tennessee were still pretty big, pretty successful competitors in the Eastern Division. That's certainly not the case right now. None of which is to devalue anything that Kirby has going on. It's just there were two different places in history, both from a program standpoint and both from a national standpoint of what was going on in college football at the time, whether it be the playoff or the income that was pouring into it. The bottom line is this: Kirby Smart and Georgia are together at the perfect time in history, and I think it's clear that everybody is on board, and I'm talking about administratively at Georgia, donor-wise, of doing everything it can. I believe they have the guy now who can take them to that next level, and they're going to take advantage of every opportunity there is to elevate the program, and that's what's going on right now.
I want to talk to you about DeAndre Swift and Jake Fromm for a minute. The reason I want to bring up both these names is because ESPN recently kind of did a preview of the upcoming season, kind of their 100 days out, looking at some of the key storylines, and they had 10 likely Heisman candidates this upcoming season. 3 programs had 2 players listed. You can probably guess Alabama and Clemson are both in there with Jerry Jeudy and Tua Tagovailoa, Travis Etienne, and Trevor Lawrence. And Georgia was the 3rd team with 2 Heisman candidates listed, Jake Fromm and DeAndre Swift. Of those 2, Chip, if Georgia puts someone in New York City, do you think it's more likely Fromm or more likely Swift?
I would probably say Swift at this date and time because of just the way Georgia operates. One of Georgia's most successful plays is to hand the ball off in the backfield or to pass it to a back, and that's what's going to be the case in 2019. And this is why a lot of times they say it's not good to have more than one Heisman Trophy candidate on your team because they tend to detract from each other,
yeah.
And that may be the case with DeAndre Swift and Jake Fromm. When you look at the history of the Heisman Trophy and quarterback, generally they are, wildly productive. And the way Georgia is set up is just not for the quarterback to pile up these enormous numbers. Now, there is the opportunity. It depends on how it comes out, but more than any other, I think DeAndre Swift is going to be the featured player in Georgia's offense, and that probably goes over and above Jake Fromm. Now, if they turn him loose and he throws it around like crazy and Georgia goes undefeated and wins the national championship, I'd give Jake. But I'd definitely give the edge on the odds to DeAndre Swift just because of all those reasons.
Here is a name that you almost certainly would not expect me to ask you about, but there's a specific reason I do, and that's Georgia offensive lineman Solomon Kinley. Pro Football Focus College, their Twitter account, tweets this out. Along the interior of the SEC offensive line, no one was a better pass blocker than Georgia's Solomon Kinley. Chip, they give him a score of 88.3. Now, I want to ask you to tell me how they tabulate 88.3 as Solomon Kinley's run blocking score, but I'm going to take them at their word on this for a moment. And I kind of have jokingly say that that's a name that you wouldn't expect me to ask you about because even during the season, I don't know how much you and I talk about Solomon Kinley. Admittedly, at times, I probably focus in more on the Cade Mays and the Jamari Salyers and the Isaiah Wilsons and, some of those 5-star names along that Georgia offensive line. And yet Kinley, every single year at that left guard spot, massive as he is just a bedrock for Georgia. And that score, while I can't tabulate it, I'm not necessarily that surprised to hear that because of the way in which Kinley's reputation has grown along the way as a Georgia offensive lineman. And yet it's pretty clear that he's one of the Dogs' unsung heroes, is he not?
Well, he is. And, I don't think anybody would argue with you when you say he's probably as well-liked as there is on Georgia's offensive line. And that's for a lot of reasons. Number one, he's probably the one and only 3-star over there, right? I guess Justin Schaefer might have been a 3-star as well, and he has certainly played above that grade But Solomon Kinley was a 3-star out of Jacksonville. He was late in coming to football. I think he weighed 360, 370 pounds coming out of high school, immediately. He was a project to get him into shape. And let me tell you something now. If you go back and review, Justin Tell can validate this. Georgia hires Sam Pittman in the middle of December of 2015 after Kirby Smart was hired, and one of the first visits that Sam Pittman and Jim Chaney made was down to Jacksonville to get Solomon Kinley on board. So they saw something in this guy that was special and certainly made him better than the 3-star grade. He was kind of under the radar. But then there's the other side of it. There's the whole underdog factor, and then what you're talking about, all these 5-stars have come in and have been unable to unseat him. But then it's just his personality. He's got the dreadlocks. He's the kind of guy, he's got a permanent smile on his face. You ask him a question, he's going to try to think of what the humorous reply is first, before he gets to it. So, he's just a big, jolly bear of a man. But let me tell you, Pro Football Focus, now those guys break down every frame of every film, far beyond what I do on a day-to-day basis. And if they say 88.3, I believe them because they do a good job with that. And all I know is Solomon Kinley wouldn't still be in that starting lineup if he wasn't grading at that point, because Georgia's brought in all kinds of 5-stars that just because of their recruiting pedigree, there's a little bit of pressure to get a guy like that in the lineup. Solomon Kinley, to this point at least, has held off all comers, and that's a good thing for the Georgia Bulldogs.
Let me finish with this, Chip. I have somewhat conflicted feelings on the Diamond Dogs here, in that I believe with Wilcox and, as you mentioned, Emerson Hancock and what Tony Losey's been, they've got enough pitching to win a national championship. And, offensively, I've still got some concerns about this team. For instance, they would not be my pick to win the SEC tournament, despite the fact I think that the number 3 seed wouldn't be my pick there. I think they're going to have a little bit of potential issues in a regional, even though they're going to host it. And, I know last year they didn't get out of the regional. I think offensively they may have some issues there. But once they get into a super regional where it's them against another team in a best of 3 with Georgia's 3 hosses on the mound, that's a situation where I really like Georgia. And in an 8-team tournament like the College World Series, when you may have some really tired staffs by the time that thing stretches on, I think Georgia could be in good shape there. This is the kind of team, pitching and defensive-wise, that can win a national championship. Are they going to score enough runs to really make a run into June?
Yeah, you've drilled right down on it, Brandon. Look, if there's a better college baseball rotation in America, I don't know who it is, and I got to admit I don't follow college baseball the way certainly others do, and certainly all these different services and stuff. But when poor Alabama comes in there this weekend with whatever their record was, 7-20, I think, maybe in the SEC. And they come showing up and they get Cole Wilcox, 100 miles an hour, Tony Losey, 98 miles an hour, Emerson Hancock, who I watched personally touch the radar gun at 98 and 99 miles an hour a couple times. Then he'd come back with his curve, which was 83. That's Major League Baseball stuff, right? There's no question it is. And then the good news for Georgia is their bats have really been going for a while now, these last 2 weekends. What you don't know is were they feasting a little bit on some poor pitching? And, the pitching you're going to face, obviously, in a regional and super regional is going to be way better, maybe to some extent. But right now, they're 3, 4, and 5 hitters, which are Aaron Shunk, L.J. Talley, and Cable. Those guys are batting lights out. They are absolutely. And here's the interesting thing that the narrative on this baseball team. We go back to the Adam Sasser stuff that happened, and he's off first base. And it's natural. Well, Georgia's not going to have the power numbers that they had last year. Actually, they're on pace to break the home run mark that they set last year with a completely different lineup, and that's because they don't have one guy with 15 or 20 home runs. They got a bunch of guys with 6, 8, 10 home runs, and they're kind of heating up right now. This team's got some moxie. right now that's kind of feeding on each other. They say it's contagious. Now, as far as the SEC tournament, Georgia's in the position where the SEC tournament's really just a sort of an annoyance. It's like the fly in the room that's got to be swatted. If you get there, that's great. Scott Strickland told me this weekend we're going in there to win every game, and I'm sure they will. But this is not going to make or break. It's not going to change your seed. Georgia's a top 8 seed, regardless of what happens in that tournament, and that'll be their focus going forward. Is trying to get past where they did last year when they hosted a regional as a national seed and did not advance. They'll be very, very disappointed if they didn't advance this year. But at this point, this team would be disappointed if they don't end up in Omaha.
Yeah, Chip, great stuff. Looking forward to reading a bunch more from you on them at DawgNation.com, and a lot of great stuff coming this week as well. We appreciate your time here on DawgNation Daily, and we'll enjoy chatting with you again soon.
Okay.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
So Barry Watkins, watching us on Facebook, disagreed with my SEC tournament take. He said, the Dogs are going to win the SEC tournament, BA. You need to show them a little love. And I guess my point on this, to be more clear, is a little bit more like what Chip said, that ultimately, the SEC tournament is not something that Georgia really needs right now. It looks like they are going to be one of these top 8 seeds. And I heard Strickland talking last week on the radio, and he said something to the effect of, I'm assuming his number's correct, but he said somewhere in the neighborhood of like 75% of the teams that advance the College World Series do so by being one of those top 8 national seeds. Hosting a regional, then hosting the Super Regional is just a crucial step towards being able to get to Omaha for the College World Series. Georgia has done its work to set itself up for the postseason beyond the SEC tournament. So really, the SEC tournament is just icing on the cake now for the Dogs. Although I am kind of fascinated to see how it all plays out and see Georgia one more time measuring up itself against the top SEC competition. But ultimately, it's that regional situation, that super regional situation for the Diamond Dogs, that's going to make the biggest impact here. Let me do the SEC through for a moment. I'll remind you about my friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia. If you've got a damp basement, kind of a wet spot, crawl space, you got one of those little cracks or crevices that starts to show up, it could be a foundation issue. And if you have a foundation issue, you want experts taking care of that for you. That means you want Engineered Solutions of Georgia, because they have a full-time engineer on staff, and that really matters. It's going to matter for you as well. They'll get your house back up to pristine condition once again. So simply give them a call at 678-ESOG-NOW. That's 678-ESOG-NOW. I want to do a quick follow-up before we do our summer Q&A. A quick follow-up to something we talked about a bit last week. So last week we looked at Tom Fornelli, CBSSports.com, and his ranking of the top 25 coaches in all of college football. Y'all know I love lists. We're kind of in that list season of the year. Top quarterbacks, top coaches, top venues, top everything else, and I like all that kind of stuff because I like college football conversations. Well, the Fornelli list at CBSSports.com actually stretches beyond the top 25. It goes all the way to the Power 5 coaches overall, which is 65. And there are a few interesting names here, and almost all of these, I think you can make a pretty strong case, are either ranked way too high or way too low. Some coaches overrated, some coaches underrated. Let me start with Ed Orgeron, who, according to Tom Fornelli, is 30th. The 30th best coach in the country right now. And I know this is very much on brand for me to say, but think about this along just with yourself for a moment and see if I'm lying. If I told you for the next 5 years, who's more likely to produce more success, Ed Orgeron at LSU or Dan Mullen at Florida? Now, that ought to be a fair comparison. Florida's won national championships. LSU's won national championships. Starting today, over the course of the next 5 years, you think Dan Mullen's going to build a better program than what Ed Orgeron's building right now at LSU? And y'all know, for those of you who've been with us for a while, a year ago, I was not high on Orgeron. A year ago, I'd seen Orgeron have some recruiting misses. I thought he had some issues on the field. I don't feel that way quite as much anymore. I think Ed Orgeron's in a pretty good spot. There are not 29 coaches in college football doing a better job than he's doing. I know he's got a kind of a cushy job at LSU, but he's managing that program pretty well right now, including with a quarterback probably better than they've had in a while. I know they've still got some quarterback issues at recruiting. I'll grant you that, but I think Orgeron's doing a better job. Conversely, a coach that I used to be pretty high on, I got to say, I don't know if I'm quite as high on anymore. That's Will Muschamp at 35. I would have told you before that Muschamp's probably one of the 25 best coaches in the sport. One of those guys that would be coveted by other SEC teams or really any program looking for a guy. But at some point in time, even a place like South Carolina, at some point in time, Muschamp's got to do some more winning if he's going to validate a ranking like that. I think they're going to be better along the defensive line this year, but along the offensive line, I'm not so sure. They have not run the ball well the last couple of years. And at some point in time this season, I think there's a really good chance they make a quarterback change. Going to a guy like Ryan Helinski over a guy like Bentley, who was at one point in time supposed to be the savior of that program. And now I think some South Carolina fans have now turned their eyes towards Ryan Helinski, who's an incoming freshman and went through spring practice and drew some rave reviews. I think the jury is out on Muschamp a bit. Now, as we said last week, Muschamp may be saved here because of the scapegoating that's going on of Steve Spurrier. Spurrier right now getting blamed for how he left that program in 2015, and that's giving some cover for Muschamp. At some point in time, he's got to win a little bit more. Let me rattle through a few more of these kind of quickly here, too. Bob Stoops is at 39. I should say Mark Stoops at Kentucky is at 39. Joe Moorhead's at 48. I think both those guys probably too high. Barry Odom at 49. He actually may be too low on this list. Missouri's a tough out right now. Missouri is indeed a tough team to beat. I don't know if that makes Odom a good coach or not, but Missouri's going to win its share of games. They're going to be a fringe top 25 team, for instance, maybe in 2019. You got Jeremy Pruitt at 52. It's just kind of funny seeing him so low on this list. Just one spot ahead of Derek Mason. If you're Derek Mason, you're like, why would Jeremy Pruitt be ranked ahead of me in terms of on-field coaching stuff? What have we seen from Jeremy Pruitt as an on-field coach? Ultimately, Pruitt's going to be higher on these kinds of lists in the future because he's going to recruit well enough. But it just goes to show you that Kirby Smart dealt with some of this himself after the 2016 season. It's not enough when it comes to your national brand, your national recognition, just to be a good recruiter. At a certain point, even recruits are going to start doubting you. You've got to have some wins to back that up. With Pruitt, though, in an improved SEC East compared to what it was a couple of years ago, crossover game against Alabama, I really wonder if he's going to win enough games to satisfy Tennessee fans and keep them patient. The recruiting for Tennessee, I think, speaks for itself. They're doing a pretty good job, but they got to win some games on the field. Then you get to, as I said, Derek Mason at 53, Matt Luke at Ole Miss at 58. Why he'd be ranked ahead of any SEC coach, I don't know. He's ahead of Chad Morris at 59. If you polled 100 SEC fans, 1,000 SEC fans, 10,000 SEC fans that really follow this league, there's not a single person anywhere that would take Matt Luke ahead of Chad Morris. They just wouldn't. I'm not telling you either one of them are great coaches, but even if it's just one spot ahead, it's ludicrous to rank Luke above Morris, just given what looked to be the direction of those two programs right now. We'll make that your SEC through. And we have saved ourselves a little time here as a part of our regular broadcast for our summer Q&A. And I told you before I wanted to add a bonus question to this. We don't have this in the fancy graphic, but in honor of the conversation we just had, give me an overrated and an underrated SEC coach. And for the overrated coach, you can't all say Dan Mullen. I'm going to say give me an overrated coach other than Dan Mullen, because obviously if I just left that open, that's pretty much what every single one of you would say. Give me an overrated coach. Give me an underrated coach. We'll add that to the rest of our questions. Can I read those one more time before we dive in here and start taking some comments? So we talked a lot of recruiting off the top of the show, the number one recruiting storyline to watch right now. You heard Chip and I break down the Diamond Dogs a bit. Give me your thoughts on that team heading towards the postseason. And in honor of Keely Ringo's mom, who was not the least bit scared with what looked to be a gigantic boa constrictor over the weekend in some photos that showed up on social media. Are you scared of snakes? Yeah, there's Ringo's mom again for the video audience. I mean, she's smiling and she's just as cool as a cucumber. That's pretty impressive. That's a pretty impressive situation, because I got to tell you, that is not what my reaction would be. I'm like Keely Ringo, who said that he would never be able to do that. So good stuff from him there. And we'll kind of get rolling. Brandon Vernon says, don't forget when it comes to the Tennessee coaching staff, they've got that offensive genius, Jim Chaney. Yeah, that's definitely true. Chris Branham also says that's a python, not a boa constrictor. Either way, that's not something I want to be messing with. I like Willie Gray Jr.'s answer on the subject of an overrated coach. He says, how about Kentucky offensive coordinator Eddie Gran? For obvious reasons here this offseason, I think that's pretty good. Chad Clark says he thinks Jimbo Fisher's overrated, and I am imagining we'll probably get a few of these comments both on the air now and then once the show is done. I know that Jimbo is not a popular coach. I know there are a lot of people who don't like Jimbo. And I'm not quite so sure at this stage of the game I'd rank Jimbo ahead of Kirby Smart as a coach, because if they were both available in the open market, I don't know if you gave 10 top 10 type teams a choice between Jimbo Fisher and Kirby Smart. I don't know that Jimbo is going to be taken by the majority of those teams over Kirby. But Jimbo's still a good coach, and he's still going to be a major factor in the SEC West at Texas A&M. My point here is I kind of like Jimbo a little bit more than the kind of the average fan seems to, because he always seems to show up in some of these overrated conversations. A lot of folks don't like Jimbo. I think some of the shine's come off him a little bit at the end of his Florida State tenure, but I thought that was a massive hire for Texas A&M when it made it. And he's a big factor in the SEC West, even if he doesn't win the division. Georgia Peach says Ringo's mom is a boss. Yeah, for sure. I mean, she looks like she could, if she's that kind of tough to go out there and wrap a python around her, she's just as tough as some of these recruits are. That's pretty impressive from her, for sure. Top Fan says, yeah, is that a constrictor snake wrapped around her neck? I mean, it looks like it to me, Top Fan. I don't quite know how all that works out, but she's very, very, very impressive stuff from Mrs. Ringo there. Kevin Blackman says, overrated coaches. This is on YouTube, by the way. Mark Stoops, Barry Odom. He says, overrated Stoops. Odom is underrated. Yeah, I think that to the extent that somebody the other day called Mark Stoops a proven winner at Kentucky, I don't think one season, even though it was a very good season for Stoops a year ago, I don't quite think that makes you a proven winner. So I'll agree with you that he's overrated. I'll also agree with you that Barry Odom right now is a little underrated. I mean, year after year, this team continues to be tough to beat. I don't know how many games they're going to win, but I know that beating them is not necessarily an easy thing to do. So that's a part of our summer Q&A. We'll kind of keep that going here on our video channels as the show rolls on afterwards for R.S. Andrews Cool Down. And if you're listening radio and podcast, we'd love to have you reach out to us as well at DawgNation Daily on Twitter. You can be a part of this conversation too. I'll also say on the way out the door here to make sure you check out AJC.com to get Atlanta news now on the serious stuff, like the things happening in their legislature, or the things involving the government, or kind of the relaxing stuff, as we said on Friday, kind of heading into the weekend with all the things that you need to know about happening around the city of Atlanta. If you live in Atlanta, or if you care about Atlanta, if you have friends in Atlanta, AJC.com the place to go to get Atlanta news now. Make sure you check that out. Something else I know you're going to want to check out as well is our Gator Hater Updater, because we like providing that for you each and every day here on DawgNation Daily. It's one of my favorite things to do. Watch that number keep climbing and climbing and climbing. I'm now happy to tell you that it is now, how many days? 933. 933 days. That's how long it's been since those lousy, stinking Gators beating the Georgia Bulldogs. And that number is going to keep going and going, and we can't wait to watch it do that. Y'all have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow morning, 10 a.m., DawgNation Daily once again. All right, and on video. Time now for our R.S. Andrews Cool Down. Air, heating, plumbing, electric. R.S. Andrews can do all that for you. That means if your air conditioner is broken, they can replace it or they fix it, whatever. Water heater, kind of the same thing. Any of those major appliances, story after story, Dari and the guys over at R.S. Andrews, they deliver smiles. And so their big question is going to be, how can they make you smile? And let's face it, it's about to be 90 tomorrow. Summer's here. These kind of spring, mild temperatures, they're over and done with. I believe summer is here, and I believe it's here to stay. That means your air conditioning needs to be working the right way. There's a reason why we call this the R.S. Andrews Cool Down, because when you walk in that house and that stuffy feeling going to hit you right in the face, that is not a thing that makes you smile. But when R.S. Andrews comes in, either gives your AC a tune-up or talks to you about the next step for maybe a air conditioning unit that's kind of breathed its last little bit of cold air, they'll take good care of you. rsandrews.com, the website to go to get more information on that. All right, let's get some comments, and we shall chat. Let's see what's kind of going on here. Let me do Facebook here I did YouTube first the other day. Chuck Pearson says, who's going to be the next to commit? I don't know if it's going to be the next one. Obviously, Miles Murphy, as expected, off the market. He does commit to Clemson. That's not a huge surprise. Justin Rogers is going to make his decision today, announce his decision anyway. I don't expect that to be Georgia. That probably won't be too big of a surprise when it goes down. When you think about next big story that could fall, obviously, Richt Gilbert has told us before that he's looking at a summer decision time, left the door open that he could delay that, but assuming that he wants to get this over before the start of his senior year, that's one of those names I am paying close attention to for the summer to see if that ends up being good news for Georgia. As Jeff Sintel, I talked to him before the show started, he said it wasn't a big deal that Gilbert was in Knoxville instead of the scavenger hunt for this particular weekend, but that's at least something to pay attention to, what could be next with Richt Gilbert. So in that who's next type of discussion, it's obviously a contested recruitment for him right now, but he's one of those kind of next guys to be paying attention to, because assuming that he believes he understands how the tight ends are going to be used at Georgia, or the other schools that he's considering, it sounds like he might be ready to rock and roll. On the subject of over and underrated coaches, Robin McCullough says, I like Derek Mason. He'll be more successful at school with a bigger recruiting base. That may be true. I don't like some of Mason's antics sometimes. I think sometimes Mason's a little too outspoken, frankly, in such a way that, he has nothing to back it up, and, he doesn't have the horses to compete with a lot of the teams that he's playing. For instance, do you remember what he said when, Georgia still had Eason? And yet it was pretty clear that Fromm had become the starter. And, Mason went on this long rant about how Kirby Smart wasn't going to fool him with the Eason Fromm stuff. I don't think Kirby Smart had any intentions of trying to fool Derek Mason. Fromm was the quarterback for the time Georgia played Vanderbilt in 2017. And yet Mason kind of put a chip on his shoulder about that. I think that Mason has some weird antics sometimes, but as a defensive coach especially, he's a pretty good defensive coach, and he comes across as a pretty sharp leader of the program as well. Dustin Goodwin outside the SEC says he thinks Brian Kelly's overrated, the Notre Dame coach. I kind of agree with that. Antoine Gray says, peace out. Antoine, thanks for being with us. Appreciate that. Miriam Martin Corbin said, how many days until the first game? Miriam, I believe for Georgia's first game, we hit the 100-day mark this week. Al Birchfield says UK is a tough place to win. 2018 was about as good as it gets. Yeah, I have a hard time seeing Kentucky having a much better season anytime soon than what they were able to do in 2018. James Crump on the subject of Gus Malzahn, and I'm assuming the overrated coach part of this, saying that Gus is inconsistent. When they have a great running game with a quarterback and run, they are tough. The problem is Gus doesn't realize that. Yeah, Malzahn's one of those guys that has obviously built teams and been a part of teams that are very, very good. National champion offensive coordinator in 2010, SEC champion in 2013, won the West again in a tough situation in 2017. And yet around that, there's very little connection seemingly with the best teams that he's been able to have and the worst. Just a wild EKG, up and down level of performance. It's really been kind of an odd thing to see. But that's been kind of the Gus Malzahn story. By the way, I'll also tell you, our buddy Connor Riley enjoying a little time off today. So Connor is not with us, which means two things. You won't be hearing his voice during this portion of the time, but also I'm going to get off the air in a couple of minutes because I got to get the podcast and the radio show ready. So I'll be hopping off a little early today to kind of take care of some of that kind of stuff. So I won't be able to stay with you all the way to like 11:30 or 11:45, some of the stuff that we've done. Sonia Prescott says, B.A., how's the smoke mullet this weekend? So obviously that's a reference going back to our Eddie Mullets and the mullet somewhat hastily put together that our buddy Eddie has here. And some people were talking about, when they think mullet, they don't think hairstyle, Kentucky mudflap hairstyle. They think, seafood type thing. And I said, I'm going to try to find a mullet fish. I'm going to put it in a bowl and let it swim around here. Also some mullet dip. I know maybe you probably enjoyed a little seafood with some warm weather outside, Sonya. That's a great question. Barry Watkins says, I think we land Rogers, so we'll see how that goes a little bit later on today. I'm not quite sure what time he's going. Let me do YouTube again here for a moment. John Anthony on the subject of schedules. Yeah, according to the ESPN FPI data and things like that, South Carolina, toughest schedule in the country this season. They got the permanent crossover game against Texas A&M. Their temporary crossover this year is Alabama. Out of conference against Clemson. Toughest schedule in the country. Memphis Dog says, with no Connor here, that means no Game of Thrones discussion. Yeah, you won't have to worry about me bringing that up because I didn't even see it. Top band giving you more information than you probably wanted to know. G Grace with a funny message to Chime Dog. J.W. Schwartz on the subject of Kendall Milton, who recently dropped his top four, which was Alabama, LSU, Georgia, and Ohio State. Kind of interesting that Oklahoma didn't make the cut for him after at one point in time there had been a lot of national chatter between he and the Sooners. J.W. Schwartz says, what's the odds Kendall Milton says UGA is for him with Bam on his Final Four when his family was in Athens for 3 days versus a few hours in Tuscaloosa? I mean, me personally, I would favor I'd favor Georgia over Alabama right now just based on, kind of the tea leaf type stuff. I think the Ohio State thing could be somewhat serious. I think the LSU thing could be somewhat serious. I don't know that Alabama is among the most serious contenders for Milton compared to the other ones. That's also partially a bit of a guess there as well. There's also some kind of mixed reviews coming out of Milton's performance at the Open qualifier. Maybe not the world's best spark score and things like that, but I also don't know that I necessarily care all that much about that one way or another. But that is kind of some of the stuff that's out there. Danny Blackman says Auburn has a tough schedule every year, and especially with Georgia being good the way that it is right now, that's going to impact Auburn in a negative way because the SEC West over the last few years has been better than the SEC East. So when you get the full SEC West schedule plus Georgia and then anybody out of conference, and in a lot of these years Auburn has scheduled a pretty substantial non-conference game. When you've got non-conference opponent SEC West and Georgia, that's going to set you up to play one of the toughest schedules. And this year, if we're going to say on paper South Carolina's got the toughest, I would say that Auburn's not far behind. Also, Texas A&M's not far behind. And in a lot of ways, I'm a little surprised that A&M hasn't gotten more schedule talk than it's gotten because it plays full SEC West. Its crossover game, temporary rotational crossover game, this year is Georgia, and it plays at Clemson. So, I mean, if we're going to be talking about tough schedules, you got to mention Texas A&M in that discussion here a bit as well. It's one of the reasons why I have gotten some pushback when I've mentioned the possibility that A&M could be a top 10 team when it plays Georgia in November. And it's kind of rare for Georgia to play a non-Auburn top 10 game in Athens in the month of November. It's done that with Auburn plenty of times. Hasn't probably done that with other teams as much as you might think. In fact, I'm straining to remember a team other than Tech in 1990 that came to Athens as a top 10 team in November other than the occasional Auburn team. But some people are saying it's going to be hard for A&M to be a top 10 team like that, just given all the teams that will have played before it plays Georgia. That's probably fair to say. It won't play LSU until after it plays. Cliff Payne says if Georgia can this goes back to our summer Q&A question about those key storylines. Cliff says, if UGA can start picking off these defensive tackle recruits, then watch out. UGA would literally be unstoppable in recruiting. That's the next shoe to drop for sure. And, yeah, that's a big deal. Jeff stuff on Jordan Birch, which you heard from Friday, what everything's staying with kind of like Jacoby Cowan. That gets Jalen Carter. That gets to be kind of an interesting discussion to be had. John Anthony says Sunshine is the snake's name. Yeah, that's crazy today. Grun asking about Connor. Yeah, Connor will be back tomorrow. He's taking some vacation time today. BTW says it irks me when those highly rated Georgia boys keep getting away. I'm assuming that's reference to Miles Murphy, who we'd kind of, given last rites to, not a good while ago. That just never seemed destined to happen. Somebody mentions an overrated coach. I think this is a good one to mention. Matt Rukavina says that Chip Kelly is an overrated coach, and I agree with that. I do not believe that there is any there with Chip Kelly. And this is a guy that when he was leading the NFL and rushing at the Philadelphia Eagles, I thought this is a pretty good coach. And yet, in the aftermath of that, you find out he's just kind of a weird guy. So weird that before it hired Dan Mullen, there were those rumors out there that Florida's going to hire Chip Kelly. You may have remembered me on this show at the time saying, I don't believe Florida will even consider hiring Chip Kelly. I think they like the idea of that possibility being out there, but I wish that Florida was this dumb. But ultimately, they're not going to be that dumb. They're not going to hire Chip Kelly. That's pretty much exactly the way that worked out. Kelly's one of these guys that had a cushy situation at Oregon, at kind of the right place, right time, with a lot of Nike money invested there, and he had kind of a interesting offense, and it all seemed to fall in place and work together. Y'all, for those of you that read any of like the national recruiting stuff, go look at what a disaster, abject disaster UCLA's recruiting class this past year was. For instance, they had a scholarship offer to a player they were trying to get. He chose to go walk on at Washington instead of taking a scholarship at UCLA. That's the kind of like ugly, bad situation that UCLA just had with its recruiting class. Randy Hall says Mullen's going to be gone in 2 seasons. I think there's a very good chance that's true. And I hope it's not true, but I think there's a very good chance that it will be true. Eventually, Florida's going to realize that its biggest problem is recruiting. I think a lot of Florida fans thought their biggest problem was developing a quarterback, and that's why Mullen became as popular as he did, as quickly as he did, that they needed to find that next quarterback. That's something that Muschamp never did, something that Jim McElwain kind of never did, some of that was bad luck with Will Grier, but never did. And I think Florida erroneously thought its issue was quarterback. However, its biggest issue is the fact that it's just not recruiting at a consistent top 10 level. It's not. It's had, one top 10 class in the last 7 or 8 recruiting cycles, something along those lines. Going back to the end of the Will Muschamp era, something along those lines. They just have not recruited at a top 10 level. And if Mullen ever leaves, I don't think Florida will make that same mistake for 3 consecutive coaches. I just don't think so. Marcus Bass says, on the subject of the Q&A question, but the Diamond Dogs going to be a force to reckon with. I see them winning the national title. Marcus, I hope that's true. I think it'd be a lot of fun. First of all, I've had a great time watching this baseball team. I'm a bigger college baseball fan now than I used to be at really any point in time in my sort of sports fandom life before this, because it's never been easier to follow college baseball than it is right now. The SEC network just does a good job of televising these things. Between the regular network and the alternate channels, or more specifically the SEC Network Plus, which makes the stuff available on ESPN3 and the ESPN app and things like that, you can actually really follow this sport pretty closely now, and you can pay really close attention to it. SEC Network has a lot of analysts that cover this stuff in studio. I think the SEC Network has unquestionably benefited the league. I know it's made a lot of money for the league, but in terms of the coverage it's provided for some of the non-football sports, they've really done a good job covering it. And I think compared to the Big Ten Network and certainly the Pac-12 Network, which is a total joke, Longhorn Network too, the SEC Network has really, really raised the standard of coverage for these other sports. It's still, obviously, from a fan interest standpoint, across the league, minuscule compared to football, and that'll never change. But in terms of being able to educate yourself and follow along with the sport, the SEC Network has really made that easier to do. So I've had fun following this team through that platform this year, and I can't wait to see the postseason. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. A lot of fun. Let me get back over to YouTube for a moment. Croking123 says the baseball team isn't a recruiting powerhouse. However, I did see this, though, and I thought it was kind of interesting. Compared to some of the other SEC teams, I guess Georgia's maybe not as much of a recruiting powerhouse. But according to Baseball America, they tweeted this, that Georgia's got more future draft picks, or as many future draft picks as virtually anybody in the SEC. So in terms of future pros in this team right now, Georgia's got about as much as anybody. So this is a pretty deep roster. This is not just, some flukish team. They've got some future draft picks on this team. Some of y'all talking about recruiting rankings. I'm seeing a lot of different rankings on the 24/7 composite, which is what I pay the most attention to, where you basically average up all the the main sites into one thing. It's just more. Anytime you take an average of a few things, you just get a more accurate representation of where things stand. Georgia's 5th in the 24/7 composite, right? I mean, I guess Miles Murphy going to Clemson probably doesn't change all that much because they were already ahead of Georgia. Georgia's 5th, right, in the composite. Isn't that true? Y'all can correct me if I'm wrong. Croking123 says, I love our baseball team's chances this year. Even more impressively, UGA is doing it on not great talent. And Croking, I understand where you're coming from on that, but as I said before, when it comes to like future draft pick type stuff, Georgia may actually have a few more of those than people realize. The Baseball America folks had kind of pointed that out. Scott Harris says, what percentage of 5 stars are prima donnas? I think that's an interesting question. Obviously, you run the risk of some of that kind of stuff with some recruits because they've just been told how good they are for such a long time. However, I think there's also a counterexample of that too, which is when you are going to the camps a lot, when you're going to the the elite events a lot, and these kind of showdowns, the reps, the camps themselves want to put 5 stars with 5 stars and have them doing reps against each other. So it's one thing to get the big head when you compare yourself to the guys on your current high school campus, or even in some cases the kids in your state. However, if you really travel around, and we're going to be in that kind of opening season and Elite 11 season and all those kinds of things, when you really travel around a bunch like that, if you're comparing yourself to other elite recruits, being the prima donna and having the big head too much, if you're really putting yourself out there and putting your reputation on the line, it's not easy to have a big head unjustifiably when you're going up against big-time guys in rep situations, because everybody's got their phone out, everybody's videoing it, and you win a rep or lose a rep, that thing's going to be on Instagram, Twitter, and everything else in the next 2 seconds. And gosh knows we'll be talking about it on here. That's just kind of the way that it goes. So I think that helps keep recruits humble because they are going to be compared to other 5-stars, and within that universe of only the elite recruits, some guys are able to justify their ranking and justify what their athleticism suggests, and some guys kind of aren't. We can all point to over the years. I'm not going to mention any names here. We can all point over the years to the 5-star guy that had the look, had the build, maybe had a moment early in his high school career where he showed those credentials, but against elite competition for a junior year and a senior year, some of these guys just can't back it up when it comes to actually going out there and doing reps against other people. Once again, I'm not going to mention any names, but we can all think of examples of that. And the need to go out and prove yourself over and over again against the top competition at all these camps, I think that forces humility on a lot of folks. Raymond Jordan says, do you feel with Bama being Bama and with LSU and AM trending up, the UGA may have a window of 2 years? The West looks like a powerhouse again. I do think LSU right now looks like it's going to be a force for Georgia to deal with, and A&M the same way. However, I would say that LSU and A&M are going to be a bigger problem for Alabama than they are going to be for Georgia, because in most of these years, Georgia's only going to play one of these teams, and it's going to be in the SEC championship. They'll have, they played LSU last year. They're playing A&M this year. There's that kind of rotational deal with those SEC West teams. But the depth of the West is an issue for Alabama more so than it is an issue for Georgia. A potential threat to Georgia is when a team like Tennessee or Florida builds something that has some permanence to it, and all of a sudden that becomes the kind of game where Georgia's got to be at its best to win. Right now, one of the reasons why I think that Georgia's national championship window is wide open and will remain that way for a couple more years is it's not currently being tested by its division foes, and I don't believe that much is going to change on that front this year. 2020 we'll see, but my guess is for at least the next 2 years, Georgia should have a pretty easy run through the division just based on the overwhelming talent advantage that it has. Let me get Facebook here, then I've got to get out of here. Miriam Martin Corbin says some people get used to being treated like big men on campus, can't handle not. We don't need those guys here. Yeah, I think that's probably true. That you want those 5-star athletes who are still humble and hungry. You do want that. You don't want guys who think they've arrived. It's just hard to build a team around those. Steve Shaffini says, anyone say Lane Kiffin? Lane Kiffin overrated, duh. Yes, Steve, as a head coach, I would agree with you. As an offensive play caller, as an offensive coordinator, I actually think that Kiffin might be a little underrated because his reputation precedes him and his antics are so well known. But as a play caller, look at those 3 years at Alabama. I think he was pretty impressive. All right, we got to get ready to rock and roll here. I got some stuff I got to do. Thanks for being with us as part of our R.S. Andrews Cool Down. We appreciate your questions and comments. A lot of fun. Really great stuff. I'll be back tomorrow morning. Make sure you check out R.S. Andrews for any of your air, heating, plumbing, electric needs at rsandrews.com. Check out DawgNation.com. A lot of stuff on the site the next couple of days. A lot of coverage heading towards the start of the 2019 season. And as I said, back here tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. We'll have some good stuff from Jeff's piece on Jacoby Cowan. That's going to be fun tomorrow, and we'll have Jeff on the show too. So a lot to talk to him about there. We'll see you then. 10 a.m. DawgNation Daily Live. Have a great day, everybody.